Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. So this panel is called Brave New Worlds, and the idea behind it is talking about a kind of leap forward in a career or starting on a project that's perhaps a new path forward, or maybe an intimidating new universe that you have to create or think through, or some career shift that you originally never anticipated. And so we're gonna all share some stories about new beginnings and how we all confronted the unknown. So I know that our participants have had many such stories, but specifically I think we're gonna touch on, for example, with Beth, starting from indie films and then entering the superhero universe, with Gemma going from designing period and contemporary films to doing Game of Thrones, and with Mara going into really large TV shows from being an art director. And so just gonna ask the participant to share perhaps some stories of the kind of the origin stories of a new opportunity, how it came by and unfolded.
I could go first. First, I'm going to apologize. I was so excited to see so many of you on the boat yesterday that I think I wore my voice out a little bit. So I apologize in advance. I started in indie world, and I just did want to tell a little story where Inbal and I first met 23 years ago, on a movie where Tom Cavanaugh, the sitcom actor, I didn't tell her I was going to tell the story, sitcom actor has a computer that he talks to. It's a sentient computer. Mind you, this is not cool technology. This is like a 1990s desktop that talks back to him, and with bad voiceover. And there's a girl he has a crush on, Sarah Chalky from Roseanne, and the her computer talks to her, and the computers then conspire to get these two to fall in love. It was a $200,000 movie in New York in the early 2000s. I was just starting, and I knew the producer was doing it, and I was really lucky to get asked to do it. I think it was maybe my second or third feature. And they said you could bring literally one person with you. And fortunately, a mutual friend introduced us. I was trying to find who could be this kind of one person, this one partner, and it was Inbal. And we met at a coffee shop. I tried to convince Inbal that this was a story worth telling of these computers. Inbal dove in with me. And literally, 4 weeks later, we're in a cube truck. Inbal is a boss man. Inbal is in a cube truck driving through Times Square to the Salvation Army there. Any of the New York designers will know the Salvation Army on 46th Street. Loading it up with furniture to take to these sets. And in the car, literally 22 years ago, Inbal said to me, like, Bethy, I'm Bethy to Inbal, Bethy, one of these days we have to have a community where designers all come together and we all share stories and we all share advice and we all have to get together because we don't talk enough and we have to do this. Mind you, this is before social media. Email had only been out for like 4 years. And I was like, oh, how is she ever going to put this together? And here we are, 20-some years later. Yeah. It's incredible. Yeah, you and Kalina, we were pulling in on the boat last night. I was hugging Inbal, a little tear in my eye just thinking about that. So I wanted to share that. But so that was my entry into the film world, and we did a lot of indies together. We did The Apprentice. We were art PAs in The Apprentice. We are so sorry.
So sorry.
So sorry. We had no idea what we were unleashing on the world.
We were art PAs.
Though I think I was mostly on the Martha Stewart. You were on the Donald Trump one. But we shared spilling a lot of the beads here. And then we went on to do Half Nelson together, which was really kind of the jumpstart career for both of us. That was about 20 years ago. And that was a world we were both in for a really, really long time, and I was in there for, 10 years. I was in, $3 million and under budget range, and that's, New York, we were so lucky to be working there then because they did a lot of those movies there, and, that's how we really learned on the job. But then I really, really wanted to get into bigger filmmaking, and wow, that is a tough ceiling to break, and especially, with indie roots, trying to get studios to believe you can do bigger movies, you have to bash their door down. And I would go in and meet on these movies, and I still remember studios looking at me just saying, what makes you think you could ever do a movie over $40 million? What makes you think you could ever do a movie with visual effects? You've never done a movie with visual effects. And I'd say all the proper things. I'm a fast learner. I'll do my homework. I'll hire a great crew. They don't believe you, and it was really, really, really hard. So that lasted for maybe 5 years, and honestly, I'd even kind of thrown in the towel, and especially superhero movies, 8 years ago, they weren't hiring women to design those, and so there was no example. They kind of kept going back to the same mill, and but then I was just so fortunate. James Gunn came out of the woodwork, the director who created the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and he really loved Drive. So just a good lesson. Drive was a tiny movie, it was $8 million, but stylized, and he just saw something in there that he liked. And man, a shout out to the people in positions of incredible power who will take a chance on somebody. That was literally what it took. And he just said, I'm hiring her, and Marvel had to hire me, so I was very lucky. But quite a catapult, and I think the biggest movie I'd done before that was maybe $60 million, $70 million at most. And so it was, and I've been working with James now for 7 years and just done back-to-back movies, and a huge learning experience the whole way through, and it was terrifying. I'll talk more about that in a bit, but when I got the call that I was going to do it, it was equal parts thrilling and terrifying, because then I actually had to prove that I could do it. So I'll continue that story though, but I'll pass it over.
So I'm a little late to this panel and a little jet lagged, so you're gonna have to forgive me if I don't make any sense. My jumpstart in the industry, I had art directed and set designed for several years and really loved art directing. I still do really love art directing. And I had art directed the first season of True Detective in Louisiana, and had become close through that with the filmmaker Cary Fukunaga. And years later, Cary was up for making a TV show called The Alienist, and he called me and said, would you be interested? And I had been designing very small movies then, and I was like, there's no way anyone will approve this. I was like, this book has been in development for 30 years, and everyone has wanted to make this, this is impossible. And he was like, well, just try. And if you know Cary, there's like a dead, he's like, just do it, stupid. And so I kind of said, okay, well, let me put together a lookbook and see what happens. And so we spent the good part of a couple months putting these images together, getting everything together, and I don't think I came up for air for more than 4 hours at a time. And suddenly I was the designer, and it was just kind of this accepted thing. And I think that really goes to say, when you have a partner and a filmmaker who's adamant about having you there, miles are moved when that can happen. Unfortunately, what also happened is that Cary eventually parted ways creatively with the studio, and so then I was kind of standing there, and I left with Cary initially as well. We all kind of went away, and the studio came back to me and said, you're so deep in this at this point, would you consider coming back? And so I talked to Cary about it, and he gave me his blessing. And so then suddenly I'm in Budapest, and I have very few design credits under my name, designing this behemoth TV show, and I think everyone there was like, who the hell is this? And I think that kind of territory of Brave New World is just getting completely thrown out of your element and having to prove yourself to every single person on that set and in the room, and endear yourself to them so that you have allies. was probably one of the most profound learning experiences of my career. It's not just about cultural differences or language, it's also just about putting your head down and doing the work, and that also means about relationship building. And so somehow we survived it and made those giant sets and did those things, and that has since been a real launch pad for other big shows. And then suddenly, whereas before I was, art directing and designing small movies in the South, suddenly I was known as like international TV girl, and I accidentally fell into that trap for the last decade. And I think that what that has kind of taught me is, and we've talked about this briefly, is just that, no matter where you go, no matter what size the project is, it's the same startup process, which is you need to prove yourself all over again, and also build those relationships again. It kind of doesn't matter what your credits are, you got to do it again. And I think that first trial by fire on The Alienist really illuminated that for me.
On? Yes, okay. Well, we've all got such different stories, really, and I'm going to tell you, to begin with, like it was about 2008, and I was in Los Angeles, and I got a call from a really lovely woman at HBO, who's still a good friend, who I'd recently been working with, and she said, "Are you busy?" "No. I've just been reading these amazing books over the summer. They're incredible. They're crack on paper. You wouldn't believe it. Can you do some research for me?" So I said, "Sure, okay." Now it does sound like not such a long time ago, but there really wasn't Google like there was today. There really wasn't the research engines in our living room. So I took myself off to the LA library for 3 weeks or something like that, and put together the Bible for Game of Thrones. I hadn't got the job, it was just like a research project. And it was fantastic, because the more I started to look, the more I unearthed, the more I uncovered, and all these worlds, they'd sort of said to me there was no law, no rule. So I just found more and more extraordinary visual material and bunged it all in this Bible thing. Cut to, I gave it to them, and they were delighted, and off they went. They decided which country they were going to do it in, etc. And then I finally got to go for the meeting, the interview, because there were several people that they were interested in. So I said to Janet, don't forget the Bible, that's my calling card. Oh, don't worry about it. Get to the meeting, where's the Bible? "Well, Gemma, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm afraid we can't find it." And to this day, it's never, ever been found. It's so weird. Anyway, so I guess my big change in my life was Game of Thrones. I've been working pretty solidly, since 80-something, I'm quite old, I've been doing it a long time. I did theatre before that. And Game of Thrones came along, and we were discussing this at lunchtime. It was an odd experience. There were no directors at that point. They had what we call now showrunners, but at that point, none of us really quite knew what that meant either, because they were also the creators. They were David Benioff and Dan Weiss. They'd done the deal. They were writing the scripts, and they knew absolutely nothing about filmmaking. So it was a pretty extraordinary situation. And I sort of went to meet them, and what do you want, and how are we going to do this? And they just were pretty blank. They didn't really have even sort of images, or it was an extraordinary experience. And so I just thought, my God, I'm on my own here. Went back to Belfast, which was the chosen location, with a lovely supervising art director, and we sort of sat there and drew for a few weeks. We sort of drew palaces and castles and tried to kind of get into it, I suppose, which obviously, history will tell you we eventually did. And I think the big thing that we all agreed on with David and Dan and the producers and what have you was that we wanted each country, each area to be very specifically visually different. So it was important that if you turned on the telly, you'd know you were in Winterfell. Well, if you watched Game of Thrones, that is. You knew you were in Winterfell, or you knew you were in Castle Black. You knew you were in one of these places. And it gave us the opportunity to create so many different environments. It was just it was the biggest feast of deliciousness, really, I could have hoped for. So that's really how I got going.
So that's we can follow up with that story to ask everybody, whichever project you choose to speak about or in general, what are first steps that you take when you start on, let's say, an unfamiliar territory such as fantasy or large-scale filmmaking, and how did you feel as you started talking about before going into it in not just explaining your story, but also explaining who you are to people who may be a little apprehensive?
Okay, I'll jump in. I think of I can't remember who said it earlier, but that soft prep is their favorite time, and it really is my favorite time as well, because I think of it almost as like you're building your suit of armor of like being able to survive the onslaught of production and all the questions and the demands that come at you. And so, I don't think it's ever exact. I think it's really about getting lost and discovering. And so whether that's going to the city where you're shooting early and literally getting lost and wandering for inspiration, or getting lost on the internet. I like to go into art books and a lot of different other means of research to find that creative inspiration. But for me, it's really about not being myopic and focusing on a set, but focusing on the period, the tone, kind of these informative notes about things, and then absorbing as much as possible. So then the answers become instinctual instead of something you're seeking. And it's different for every project, but in some ways that armor building is exactly the same.
And I'll kind of jump off of that. One of the things I found most comforting was that the building blocks of starting a movie, whether it's a tiny movie or a giant movie or fantasy or straightforward, half Nelson, the building blocks are all the same, the steps were all the same, and I actually found that really comforting when I got into the process and realized it, that it's the research and the assembly in your department and building. Yeah. So that was actually, that's just a great thing to know, that it's not like you peek behind the curtain and suddenly it's a totally different way of doing the job, Yeah.
No, I'd agree with all of those things. I think, you think that when you're moving around to different art departments that you've got to kind of somehow educate them into your way of thinking, etc. But it's extraordinary how you still end up making a film that is your film, even though you've got people from wherever in the country or in the world that we're going. It's somehow managed to make your own film. And I think what you were talking about research and stuff, of course I do Google, everyone does Google, but I also have a lovely book collection, and I've got books that I go to sometimes that have very little to do with the actual project, but they just get my sort of juices going. They're my sort of go-to, get cracking, like this morning Patrick's talking about music. Well, I've got sort of images that I just love that get me cracking,
I just started a project in London this week, and midweek my boxes arrived of books, and it was like the Armada, literally 5 men with dollies came in with these giant boxes, and everyone was like, "What is happening?" I was like, "It's the books." I need to be surrounded by them.
And I also, when I did do that first leap into the giant movie, I did know it was Guardians of the Galaxy. It was back in 2017. We took a hiatus from it for a minute and then went on to Suicide Squad and eventually came back to Guardians. But at the time, I really did my homework. I was really lucky. I had a couple weeks, maybe 6 weeks from when I was offered the job to when I started. And I lined up so many lunch appointments with people in LA. I flew out to LA, put myself up, and I just started literally knocking on doors of what supervising art directors had worked at that level, what set decorators, construction coordinators, visual effects supervisors. Can I take you out for lunch? Can we have coffee? I just want to pick your brain, just to try to do a fast track of educating myself on anything that might be different. And certainly there were, in the visual effects part of it, obviously it's a huge component of those movies, but I just had these wonderful visual effects supervisors who sat down with me and kind of said, okay, in an ideal world, this is what would be provided by you and your department. And I just sat there and just took a gazillion notes, and so that would be just one bit of advice is, when you are making a shift, whatever it could be, just we all know it, but like really do your homework and try to find innovative ways of trying to give yourself the best leg up. Because I also do think that when you do get offered an opportunity like that, there are certainly, folks are looking to see if you're not going to be able to make that step, or if you can't make that transition in genre. Some studio person's keeping an eye out, so just set yourself up for the best success.
I think another thing too that I like to do, not just for myself, but for the entire art department, because I tend to do a lot of period work, is to bring in consultants and historians that basically give like design and history consultancy for the department, not just for myself, and we'll invite the director and whoever else wants to come, sometimes the cinematographer to talk about lighting, and it really runs the gamut of who those people are. On Interview with a Vampire, we found a woman in New Orleans who, her job title is chromochronologist, and she goes into houses in the French Quarter and cuts a 1 inch by 1 inch square into the wall and slowly delaminates it to see every layer of paint underneath it and wallpaper. And so we were able to get some of the original colors of the French Quarter, which were vastly different than what the Planning Commission now mandates the city to use. So, and again, no one in the world knows that it's a show about vampires and it doesn't matter. But for me, that's part of the joy of what we get to do, is that we can tap into those resources. Another completely wasteful resource that we used one time was an Abraham Lincoln vampire hunter. I was art directing, and there was a gentleman that was a friend of my husband's that had written a book about Lincoln's journey down the Mississippi on a flatboat, and we were building the flatboat for Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. And so he came in, and he was like the walls are just full of these bloody illustrations, and we were like, we'd like you to talk, give a lecture about the flatboat. And he was like, but it's for a Abraham Lincoln is hunting vampires. Anyway, but I think, there's so many times that when else are we going to be able to meet these people and embrace them, and also make it about an education for our departments, which we all are novices in the tone and style of the projects we start on, and likewise, so are our crew. And I think enabling them with as many tools as possible so that they're producing the most exciting work is a gift that we can provide.
Yeah, I kind of go back to, I think Patrice said it in the last panel, how, you all get in a room. It's, again, there's this big mystery of how do you pull off one of these big sequences or something with a big crazy stunt or something. And you watch these movies and you think, oh my gosh, how did they ever do that? And we've all been there. And I remember stepping into this world and thinking okay, everybody in this room knows how the script calls for, a bunch of colorful aliens fall out of a spaceship and fly and land on a big, planet made of flesh, and they cut into it and, yellow goo flows everywhere around them and it's magical. And I was like, nobody in this room has done this before. Nobody knows how we're going to recreate this exact thing. And it was very much like Patrice said, you sit in there, and there are people in there that have been doing these, big high concept movies for 30 years, and they're all looking at each other like, I don't know how we're going to do this. And that kind of becomes the beauty of it, of everybody sitting together. It's a huge collaboration, again, just the way it is on the tiny movies, and that was also really refreshing. And I find a lot of people who are in those rooms, they all want to help. Nobody wants to sit there and just tear down ideas. And so it's kind of the beauty of what we do, really, is figuring out how to do these things that none of us sitting in a room have ever tried to pull off before.
Well, to jump onto Gemma's point from before, that you could be even working across continents, but in the end, that the movie is your own movie. How do you guys assemble a crew when you start on projects, especially very large projects where you work with crews in other countries, or if you actually have to travel to another country and then work with a completely new crew that you've never met, or you can't bring your own people? Some pieces of advice there.
Well, I think every job is different, isn't it, really? Sometimes you're allowed to say, take one or two, and sometimes none at all. I think, on the whole, I'm not a great one for asking other people what they think of people. I kind of like to meet people and make up my own mind, for good or ill, sometimes, It's just a straightforward process, really, isn't it? You have to meet who are the contenders, and gradually build it from there, and who knows who and what they've done. And I think it's quite an instinctual thing, really, people that you feel comfortable with. But I also think it's really important to find people that can do things that maybe I'm not so good at. I've always been quite easy about that, really good drafts people. I'm not a good drafts person. So, get them in there. 3D models, I can't do them. Get them in there, and get the people doing all the stuff, and then you can really present as much as you possibly can to your director and the whole team of them. I think that's really important, really.
I think as the work is going more and more international, and there's different kind of systems and methodologies of filmmaking. Gemma and I have both worked in Hungary. I've worked in the Czech Republic and South America and lots of places. And a lot of times there are pass-through companies that are kind of managing productions and assisting with the studios coming from the States or from England. And I think that is a slightly complicated level when it comes to hiring, because there might be 2 or 3 pass-through companies in one country or one region, and you may be getting the crew that they work with. And so there's always a little bit of a filter through which you have to make sure you're realizing the list is being sent through, and that there's an awareness kind of, first of all, sometimes you have to play that political game, and other times you may need to advocate for yourself and work outside of that. But like Gemma said, it's so vastly different on every job. And I think the other thing that I've learned working in so many different countries is sometimes you have to adapt your expectations of the output based on what the crew can provide. And that it's not going to be the same in every country. Materials in one country may be cheaper in another. One type of labor may be more available. And so you have to be willing, or I find it's, instead of getting stuck by forcing something that's not coming natural, sometimes those kind of rethinks can lead to something even more exceptional, because you're allowing them to do what they do best.
I think that's a really good point, actually, finding what they all are best at. And because, you employ everybody the best you can get, and then you want to get the best results, don't you? Yeah.
And I'll springboard off of that. in one of my rounds of doing research, of just asking people who had worked in the bigger arena, how best to go about it. I remember one person gave me an odd bit of advice and said, well, you don't want to hire anybody that's so great at their job that they make you look bad. So just make sure, if there's somebody who's going to stand you up in a meeting, don't go with that person. I just remember thinking, like, what an odd way of thinking about this. Like, I felt like, wouldn't you want to have the best support system you could possibly have? And that was my approach as well. And then I think one of the things we just chatted about at lunch was them being really open with those people. I think some people could feel like the best approach is to go in, and so that you gain the confidence of them, you pretend you know everything that they're talking about. And I actually think that really works against you, and it's a disservice to the process, because I think, for the most part, a lot of the folks in that room will be able to see right through you and will know that you don't really know. So you're already getting off on the wrong foot, but you're also really denying yourself the chance to become educated by those people who can share so much. And so when I first started on Guardians, I just remember I was really honest with my supervising art director, my set decorator, my prop master, construction, and I just laid it all very bare, and I just said, I come from an indie world, I really do, but I wildly respect all the work all of you have done, and I'm just going to ask for your patience, and I'm going to ask for your grace, because I'm probably going to ask you so many questions along the way, and I'm going to ask you to just kind of bear with me a little bit. And sure, I did. I was asking questions left and right, but I also found that the right people are going to respond in a really lovely way to that, and will want to help, and will want to share their experience and help teach, and and so just be humble, and just be honest with your crew, and the best comes out in people, I believe.
And another thing about starting out is being able to express your idea in various ways, and perhaps there are tools that you were not proficient in before, or perhaps I'm kind of looking for what were exact learning curves that you've had to go through in various stages of your careers?
Yes, I would say mine was working with concept artists. That was the first big thing that we never did on Half Nelson. There was no such thing as a concept artist. So learning that process and learning how to communicate. And I also found that all of us do it wildly differently, which was really fascinating. I remember there, if I didn't talk to a concept artist for 2 days, I'd feel like, wow, I really neglected that person and I have to get right back and I'm not doing my job. And then he or she would say like, oh, I didn't talk to my last designer for 2 weeks, and that was actually fine because I got to really work on this thing, and so that was actually a really interesting learning process to be like, oh, we can all kind of have our own ways of doing that, but yeah, I felt like that was a learning curve, just figuring out the way to interact, the way to give instruction, and yeah, how much is too much information and how much is too little.
I think it's just a gradual process. As you get more experience, you probably start on smaller things. I started, and then you gradually, I remember going for one job and somebody asking me how I'd deal with a construction crew. I was like, oh, for God's sake, how would I deal with a construction crew? Just because it was early in my career. I'd been doing theatre for years, but they seemed to think there was something very magical about a woman designer and a construction crew. But, I think you gradually work, and if you're intelligent like everybody, all of you lot here, you just kind of take the job on, you work it through, all the wonderful things we heard about this morning, getting into it, how you get into the stories, how you break down the scripts, how you find your way into it. And then as you gradually bring the people, and you start off probably with a crew of 2, and then a bit later on you're allowed to have a concept artist, whatever. And so gradually your sort of armory gets bigger as you get more efficient and your projects grow. I think it's a really lovely process, actually, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, this is slightly off topic, but related. I think we were talking at lunch about times where we kind of learn by misfiring. And, Paul, I love what you said earlier about kind of noting your first movie and realizing that you made a mistake, but maybe not telling the director. But I do think we learn from choices that we've made, and none of us know how this is going to end up and what it's going to look like. We're collaborators in this, and the end result is out of our control. And so there's so many things you learn on watching them and adapting, but you also learn by doing. And I think I was saying at lunch that something that I learned the hard way was that I thought I kind of had to prove my chops designing, doing action. And I don't know why I thought that, but I was like, I've got to do it because then no one will think that I can't be in the room talking about construction or someone jumping through a wall. And then I took a very long international TV show over several countries, and within like 2 weeks I was like, oh, I don't actually like doing this. So, like, I can do it, I don't like doing it. And then I spent the next year talking about breakaways and men running on rooftops all the time, and didn't really get to have any creative design in that. And so as a consequence of me thinking I had to prove something that I didn't need to prove, that I learned, I'm not suited for that genre of storytelling. And sometimes we learn these things the hard way over a year instead of a couple of weeks.
Well, I was going to say, actually, getting back to Game of Thrones, because that started off very small, a very small crew, and then towards the end, I think maybe the beginning of the second year, we actually had a concept artist, and we had a woman who I still work with today, but I overheard her on the phone to her husband saying, they haven't got a clue how to use me. Which was true. I didn't really. I knew I needed images, but I didn't really quite understand the relationship between a designer and a concept artist until. But, I think just all the things we've been saying, but that was a slow growing, and then by the end, my goodness me, they had everything, every kind of visual effect going, and the dragons got bigger, but it was a very slow, I think we all learned together, which was really part of the beauty of it, possibly, that it kind of gradually got bigger as it went along.
I I'll jump on that. I was doing my first spaceship. It was the Guardian's main spaceship in the last movie, and I had never done a spaceship before. I'd done like Ryan Gosling crack dens and stuff. I had not done a spaceship before, and I didn't even know the first thing. But fortunately, we had. If anybody's ever worked with Fausto Martini, he's this absolutely brilliant concept artist, and had done just, I think he had done a Batmobile at one point and done a bunch of beautiful, ships and car design, and I just kind of flat out asked him, I was like, how can I best instruct you? Because you clearly know this so much better than I do, and he was so great. I just remember him saying, just because I think I was maybe originally coming with some like spaceship concept art I had pulled on Google, because I didn't quite know how to start. I knew I wanted it to be turquoise and pink. That was the one thing I did know, because I hadn't seen a pink spaceship before, which it was. But Fausto just said, don't even have to worry about that. Just, let's just talk about shapes. And then anyway, I ended up just thinking on that for a bit and trying to think of shapes that I hadn't seen before. And I went into my husband's garage. He has every tool known to man. And I just started going through and taking photos of this crazy tool collection of like, sawzalls and, sanders. And then finally it was the the circular saw. I ended up taking photos of that and then kind of thinking, okay. And then I thought there could be something interesting here we haven't done before. And I started, sketching over the photo of it and sending that to Fausto. And we batted this back and forth. And within just a couple weeks, we landed on, if you look at the design, if you see the movie, you look at the design, it's kind of two circular saws put together that rotate, that kind of this cool circular rotation. And I was like, that came from my husband's circular saw. I would not have known that that's how you could do this a month ago, But.
Do you reflect on your experience while you're in it? Because a lot of times I think I love the whole process of reflecting, and I feel like we're lucky to be always doing projects that have a beginning, middle, and an end, and then you can finish and then think back on it. But then when you're in the experience, it's just so overwhelming, and there's so much going on creatively, emotionally, and so on. Are you able to reflect while you're on the project or after and say, here are the things I learned, and this is what I'd like to take forward, or this is what I would like to change?
I think you should. I definitely do it afterwards. I mean, I'd experienced it. For example, I did a film 2 years ago in Budapest. It was so hard on every single level. And there was quite a lot of the people, we weren't all getting on together, but the subject matter was so tough and difficult. And I think that really affected, and it isn't until I've reflected it now, and a lot of people are coming up saying, oh, it's a really interesting film, But I realized that the subject matter and the kind of being in Budapest for the first time in many, many years, so that's always hard. But definitely later on, you begin to put it all together. At the time, there's so much flying at you, I would say, for all of us, that I don't know how you can't see the wood for the trees most of the time. You just got to keep plugging on. 6 o'clock, got to be there. You just can't stop, can you? So in my experience, anyway, that I would say later.
I think I'm very aware of kind of the alchemy and the temperament of the art department as we're working and trying to keep up morale, especially on television when it can go for years, like where you're just on something for so long, you have to maintain momentum. And so I'm very in tune to kind of what's happening, and when I can, I try to help that. But I think on Pachinko, working in South Korea, in bringing back up the pass-through company, it was very much that we kind of were told, this is the crew. This is the crew that does Western productions in Korea. And that was it. And and then these are your translators. And they are your translators because they, at one point, worked in an art department and they speak some English. And the first 6 weeks we were there was fraught with chaos and confusion, and we would ask for something and then something completely different would show up, and it was the most confusing process. And then finally one day I sat down with one of our translators and I was like, so when I asked for A, how come we got like Q3? Like what happened between, and she said, and it was very hard for her because she was kind of speaking out of turn about the pass-through company, but she said, we've been told, solve the problem, don't tell Mara if we can't get A, solve it. And so they were taking up all these steps on their own to get me Q3 and not telling me along the way. And so then I would just be completely shocked. And so I said, okay, well, we can't do that anymore. But then the communication still kind of continued to be frustrating. And finally, I realized, I think it's more than semantics. I think that there's a cultural translation that's not happening, and I think we're offending each other, but we don't realize it because of the translation. And so I went to the producers and I said, I think we need new translators. I think we need people that are a little bit more mature and maybe that don't work in the film industry. And so I stumbled upon the solution with, because it was the pandemic, there were all these flight attendants that worked for Korea Air that were out of work, and I brought one in, and funny enough, her name was Ara, so it was Ara and Mara, and Ara, literally in the meeting with me, someone came in to ask me something, and then they were translating something, and she said, and I responded, and then she said, no offense, but that was kind of rude because of the way you like something that, and I was like, oh my God, this is what we've been looking for. And so we brought in all the flight attendants, and it was like a light switch. And it was because these are people that are used to working in a commercial setting and appealing to multiple cultures and understanding these cultural sensitivities. But it was such a subtle thing that it was like, I still can't believe that I stumbled on that it was the translating that was becoming this issue. And also that there was no alliance to the pass-through company, that these were independent translators. And really, it was the best thing in the world. And she would constantly be like, the way you just stood there was rude. And I'd be like, okay, I don't think I can fix that, but thank you for alerting me to that. So I think that it's, you really have to, like I said, this isn't for everyone. This is just how I tend to like to manage my departments. I am very, very, very much in tune to kind of the temperaments and what's happening. And you never know what it is that might need a course correct. It can be something very, very subtle that's happening. But yeah.
I would just say that I love it's so interesting hearing everybody's approach to these things and reflecting on projects when you're in them. For the most part, I've been really fortunate. I've just found oh, I'm learning so much on this one, or oh, I'm so proud of what we pulled off last week on that one, or. But the only time that I had deep reflection on a project while I was in the middle of it was when I was here last time. I was on Megalopolis, Francis Ford Coppola's movie. I feel like I should apologize to you all again, with The Apprentice. And it was just an overwhelmingly crazy and wild story. Danny Medeiros is here, was with me on it. And you're in the middle of the fray, and you're, much like Gemma said, you're not really aware of it until you kind of stop and have a moment. And my moment of kind of stopping was coming here and having 5 days of getting out of the fray. I remember on my flight back home, flight back to Atlanta, I was like, wait, what are we doing down there in Atlanta? Oh my God. So that was the only time I really deeply reflected right in the middle of the movie. For better or for worse.
Are there, when you're thinking of future projects possibly in your, development as designers, are there specific genres or scales you're attracted to, or do you put effort into sort navigating your career in different, or is it more like Mara, navigating your career, or do you just kind of let it be and just see what happens?
I will jump in. Only James Chinlin and I had a good conversation about this yesterday on the boat. I was saying that I do feel like one of the things that has come for me, at least in the last couple of years, is this, you almost kind of become stigmatized as, oh, okay, you've done big films, so now you can only do big films. And I really revolt against that. I feel like, for me at least, I spent 16 years in tiny movie making and being really creative and really resourceful. And so I think the way that you break that stigma for me is by going and seeking out, smaller movies in between two of the superhero ones I did Dear Evan Hansen, which was like a $20 million musical, just so that I did something different and, not in the genre. And I really hope, at least whatever I do next, I do think that when you get to a point where you're lucky enough to curate your career and your body of work, and just, I think a good piece of advice is versatility is such a great thing to be able to show studios and producers and directors. And so maybe I'll be here 2 years from now eating my words, but I really hope that, I do an indie film in here as well, just to keep reminding people that, like, just because you do period films doesn't mean that's all you do. Just because you do sci-fi films doesn't mean that's all you do. And it's really fascinating. I'll say, like, cinematographers don't get pigeonholed, like all these other creative people don't get pigeonholed, but I really feel like our position gets really pigeonholed lightning fast. And I feel like it's really important to try to just break those assumptions wherever we can.
I totally agree with that, absolutely. And keep the ball in the air, small films, big films, television. It's all creative, as long as it's going to be a subject that's going to fascinate you and then keep you on that, very tough few months, years, whatever it is. It's got to be something that's going to really, really get your attention and keep you on it and your team. Because, I've always said that I won't do anything I wouldn't go and see. That's my kind of... And I've stuck to it, and I think it's really important that you do work that you do feel passionate about, because we're all addicted to the phone ringing, and you think, oh, what's this going to be, and then it's some old rubbish that you just know you can't do, or it's something wonderful, you just don't know what's going to be next, and I think you have to just keep yourself open and sort of go with the flow a bit. Myself.
Yeah, an example of not going with the flow, turning out badly, is this. I was talking to Inbal the last couple of years just about how I am like TV girl and international TV girl of mystery, and so I was saying I really would love to get back to movies just for the length of time, one director, not having a showrunner with no production experience. So TV has its own kind of just litany of problems. It's wonderful as a medium, but very tricky. And so a filmmaker had a movie, and it was it's fantastic project, and he was like, it's going to be a couple months, but then it's all coming together. Long story short, I waited the 2 months, which stretched into 7 months, and for 4 of those months, it was with bags packed, being told every other week, you're going to go, and it was first, you're going to go to New York, and then it was Boston, and then it was Pittsburgh, and then it was Atlanta, and then suddenly it was Australia in the volume for a 1970s period New York car chase movie. And I was like, what are we talking about? And but I so wanted off the TV train that I was not reading the writing on the wall that this project was just flailing. And meanwhile, there were lots of other opportunities coming my way in television, but I was so focused on not doing television. And so then I was just kind of miserable for 7 months. And so I think it's also, this industry, especially right now, is so precarious. So I think it's also just listening to your instincts on things, and maybe this desire to get off the TV train isn't going to happen right now, but don't let that dominate your ability to work, by trying to chase something that you want.
And in terms of, you're talking about being versatile and trying to make sure people see you as designers for all seasons in a way, but actually, what are traits or skills that you feel like you always carry with you? That you sort of start a new project and you're like, okay, I have no idea how I'm going to design this or do this or that, but some things you always have with you that you can rely on?
I'll jump in only because we touched upon this briefly at lunch. And I know I talked about this for anybody that was here 2 years ago. I am just such a firm believer in kindness and respect and grace in the workplace. And I think it's becoming more valued now, which is so great. But I take that literally from like the tiniest movies when it's us, and we're out there scrubbing the floor together, and or whether it's a giant movie, just making sure that you take the time to really appreciate that, that carpenter that, you don't have time to go over and spend too much, but just make sure that he or she knows you really appreciate, or you're the laborers sweeping up all the sawdust. Like, those are infinitely important. That's an infinitely important work, and it's what keeps us all going. The scenics, the laborers that come through and do all the tidying up there, and PAs, and just making sure that everybody that you're working with is feeling appreciated and recognized. And I'll tell just a quick little story. A lot of people asked how I got on the list initially for James Gunn to consider me for Guardians. And I'd gone, actually, I'll back up a little bit, we had done Half Nelson together with 2 directors who, we continued working with, and then 15 years later, they got a Marvel movie, and they wanted to bring me in, they wanted me to do the project, and wanted me to come in and meet on it. So they're like lesson number 1, even a $400,000 movie you do now, those are seeds you plant, and those can come back 15, 20 years from now to be your entry into, this new stratosphere. So I went in for this meeting, and Marvel, of course, looked at me. They was like, "You've never done these before. We don't know about this." So I didn't end up doing the film, but there was this lovely office PA who helped me get all my boards out of the car and get everything up to the room for the meeting, and I was so nervous. And she set up all the boards with me, and she was just lovely, and she was an office PA, office assistant. And I just went and I found her after the interview, and I just said, "Oh, just thank you so much." Like, and I brought her a coffee, and I just couldn't believe how generous she was. Literally a year and a half later, she was the executive producer on Guardians. And she's the one who furnished the list of 25 names for James to consider. And she just remembered me, and just remembered, like, oh yeah, like, she was kind, she was kind, and she seemed like somebody who might be nice to have in the mix. And then again, like I said, so lesson number 2 is, kindness and appreciation to everybody that's out there working really hard, because everybody is. And then the last lesson in that, just like I said earlier, then it was drive on my resume. So don't, again, discount, the offbeat, weird, funky experimental work that might come your way. You never know which director might just scratch an itch for, so.
I don't know how to follow that one. I think you just have to trust your innermost instincts about what you feel about the project, and you need to inspire your team and get them on the same page as you. And I don't know, it's a really hard question, I find, actually, because I think it's we do it all the time without realizing we're doing it. And I think all 3 of us have good reputations with our teams. People like working with us, and then there must be a good reason for that. But I think the most important thing is to be a good leader, actually, of your team, whether it's a small independent film or a whacking great big TV series. You've got an awful lot of people you've got to inspire and keep them excited. You don't want them going off having too many fag breaks. You want them there, and I think and it's also inspiring because they bring so much to it as well. So you can't, I don't know, maybe some people can, but I can't think of every single detail of every single set. They're going to bring things and going to inspire me, and I'm going to be like, then that's going to move the whole thing up. So I think it's the relationship between you and your gang that's the most important thing, really.
I couldn't agree more with everybody up here. I think for me, going back to that year of action movie or action show that I didn't really want to do, I found it really hard to maintain that positive energy that year because creatively I wasn't satisfied. And so the biggest lesson of that year was just that, like Gemma said earlier, I want to work on things that I would want to watch or that I would want to have, like, just know that they're out in the world. And that, for me, is the fuel to then be a positive leader and a leader who can, over the marathon of a TV show, maintain the ability to communicate to the team how to execute. Because I find if I lose that, everything kind of unravels because I don't have the energy to keep it up in the air for myself, let alone for a team of people.
And on that, I'll just say too, than like really taking care of yourself. You know, like you really have to figure out your system when the shows, you know, TV shows that, you know, go on forever. Some of these, you know, these projects. That was like one of the biggest learning lessons for me too. Was like, oh my gosh, okay, you're not just on this. I think we're on Half Nelson for like 7 weeks total. You know, prep, shoot, wrap, and you know, and suddenly you're on these things for 10 months, 12 months, 16 months, and you really, that's a different game, man. You really have to figure out how to keep up your stamina and your patience and whatever it is that you can kind of do to come back to kind of find your equilibrium. That was something I just didn't expect. I thought, oh, that just comes naturally because you're so excited because you're on an aspiring movie. By like month 5 out of 15, I was like, ooh, oh wow, all right, so get your system in place.
Great. I think we have some time for questions. Happy to open up. And the mic is coming, I think. Yeah, I see Tom over here. 1 second.
Oh, rock. Guys, you're great. Thank you so much. Yeah, give them some applause. It's tough sitting up there staring out at so many faces. It's sort of a reminder, one of the things is what the elders used to always say to us, though it's not always the best advice, is don't turn down anything. But you have to use some discretion even in that. But my question goes to the pigeonholing issue, which is an important one. And it's a question to you all about how do you think the pigeonholing comes more because we work in an industry that doesn't understand us or what we do? And if that's the case, how do we correct that?
Yeah, and where does the pigeonholing come from? I would feel like it, you know, we're all in here, all really creative people, and know how wide the rubber band can stretch for us visually and stylistically. But I'm always kind of amazed that I think a lot of the people who do the hiring, you know, the studios, that they're more the business folks, and I think they just want a straight answer from point A to point B. Like, oh, we want it to look like period. Who does good period? That, you know, and they just kind of keep funneling it, like thinking, okay, that's what that person does. And I think it's maybe just a little maybe lack of understanding of of the breadth that we can offer that maybe comes from studios and producers.
I mean, I think the creativity is definitely in this room and not in the producing studios. I mean, even when you think about like more and more when we start a project and you hear the numbers, like the budgets, and it's literally the budget from a production that has nothing to do with your show, but someone in an accounting department said, let's compare apples to oranges and make these people suffer. I think that it's just like, it's a very uncreative form of management, which is, they've done this, therefore they do that. And this budget was for this, therefore they must repeat. And it's so boring and exhausting. But yeah, I think the industry, outside of a lot of our crafts and what we're doing, is stuck in these very like safe, naughty places of repetition.
Are you saying we're not, I didn't absolutely hear it. Was it about being not respected as pigeonholed as designers, or?
Yeah, in terms of like genre and craft and...
Oh, and not being allowed to move out of your...
I think so. Was that right, Tom? Yeah.
Right. Personally, I haven't actually had to. I feel that I have moved around a fair amount, actually. So I'm probably not the right person to answer that question.
I have some thoughts on how that could be corrected. I mean, personally, I feel like when I interview, I think, of course, I want to show images or ideas that I had during the reading of the script, but I think that the strongest thing that comes through is my personality. And so I think that actually kind of channeling your personality through beyond your design ideas is maybe how you unpigeonhole yourself, because I feel like people should want to work with me, not just because of my ideas, and kind of see me as an artist as well as a person with some sort of like alchemy of the whole thing. And that's perhaps how you can get jobs beyond what you would be traditionally thought for. But I don't, I have never been considered for those huge jobs that involve a lot of executive producers thinking through and so on. So I know that that's a different hiring process. But, you know, whenever I still have a very personal interview with a director or producer, that I can just kind of explain that you're not just hiring a designer, you're hiring a collaborator for your artistic adventure. And so it's kind of beyond what we bring to the table visually. And then another thing I guess I would like to say, despite Mara's story about waiting for the film to happen, I do think that at times we help perpetuate our own pigeonholing, but by just taking the jobs that are offered to us without doing some deep thinking about whether this is the right project or not. So I do think that a little bit of, it's really hard to say no for jobs. And I think perhaps at times if you feel like you need to be a bit more strategic about where you want to see yourself in the future, you have to maybe project yourself a little bit and then tell yourself that's why I shouldn't be taking that job. So some of it is definitely on the industry and some of it is perhaps a little bit on ourselves. Yes, yeah, there's a question here. Sorry.
I wait. Okay. Yeah?
Do you hear me? Yes. First of all, I also want to thank you. I think there are really great, strong women on stage, and I realize that. And I just thought it was really interesting when you asked the question, what is your main skill when you enter a new project? And all of you said it's mainly the social skills, and that they are so important, and that they're often named as like female skills, things like being completely honest and say, I don't know this, can you help me? And that you all experience, like I did also in my career, that if you work like this, it comes back double, you know, because everyone knows it's, yeah, it doubles. I just wanted to respect that you also in this, you know, that the social skills are really a part of our job.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we, you know, part of the spirit of this weekend is to acknowledge that a lot of the craft of production design is not just what is traditionally production design, and that there's so much beyond our, let's say, physical craft. So thank you for that. And we'll have other really beautiful panels and workshops that touch upon these things. So more to come.
Thank you for saying that.
Perhaps one more question? Oh, sorry, yeah?
Yeah, hi. I also want to say it's very nice to see you as a woman. Thank you for that. And the other thing is, at the end, Beth, I think you said something like, when you have the feeling you're doing a long project and after 5 weeks you were like, oh, well, I want to try to. What is your secret of giving you a break, like really switching off your head? Because when I do a project, often it's running and running. I think everybody knows. You go in the supermarket, you see something that's connected to your project, and you just can't stop it. Yeah. So maybe you can advise me your secrets.
Yes, I'm really protective of the hours I work and the hours that I don't, and I make it that case for the whole crew. But everybody that works with me, we'll do 8 to 6. That's basically it. And there's no staying till 10. And I would always want that for my crew when I first started, but I would definitely be there till 9, 10 in the office, the last one, turn out the lights. And I just realized that just wasn't sustainable. And so I made a really marked decision about 8 years ago that I was just gonna it just wasn't sustainable, it wasn't healthy, and that I was just going to go home, and I was actually going to not check my email. After that time, I don't check my email first thing in the morning. I get up really early. If anybody remembers 2 years ago, I talked about my morning walks. I take morning walks. I do that. It's a ritual for me. And I don't check my email until I get into the office. If my supervisor and art director and the producers and directors obviously know, they can text me, and if it's really important, of course, or call. But a lot of the folks I work with kind of just know that I'm really not available on those hours and over the weekend. And of course, like, your mind is still going, which I enjoy that, so I'll enjoy that and let that go. And I voraciously go see things in theaters. I'll go see 4 movies a weekend if I can. I just love it, and so that always spurs ideas for all of us, right? So I enjoy that side of it. I don't find that draining. But what I do find draining is the 11 p.m. emails about the thing that needs to happen at 5 a.m. And I kind of find that when I work with a cinematographer who does not use email. He's one of the most successful cinematographers in the world. And I was like, that is phenomenal. How do you not use email? I've sent him 10 emails in 7 years. He's not answered one. And he's like, oh, I haven't looked at that email. I haven't looked in 7 years. And I just thought, wow, that's amazing. And the world doesn't fall apart. So maybe the world won't fall apart if I'm not responding to emails at 10 o'clock. But that was a huge shift for me. It was and also too, just back to the kindness thing, it's hard to show, it's hard to just have infinite and endless kindness and patience when you're underslept and when you're not catching your breath. It really is. And that was where the breaking point was for me. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually finding that I was short with that person, or I hung up quickly, or I didn't. And that was where I realized, I was like, why? And I was like, oh, because I'm sleeping 4 hours a day and working way too hard. And so I'm a huge, 2 years ago I talked about this, I'm a huge advocate for setting up your boundaries. And fortunately, I think the workplace is starting to accept that more, and definitely since COVID, starting to accept that more, so, yeah.
If I could just say one thing kind of in the end, I just want to say what Inbal and Kalina and the Production Designers Collective has done for the brave new world of design, I think, for making this a global mechanism for communication and for discussing, craft issues, discussing crew, discussing those things. I can say when I did The Alienist several years ago, going to Hungary was this completely overwhelming thing, and I just didn't know anyone that had done that, and I just felt like I was starting from scratch and trying to get an understanding of what that meant. And now I must get probably 20 calls a year from people who are going to Hungary to work, because I think that there's walls that have been knocked down in terms of us being able to collaborate and communicate about ideas and concepts, and so I can't thank the team enough for making this an easier world to work in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And on that note, thank you so much to our panelists. Appreciate everybody's input.